Look at the screen you are holding right now. If it were to suddenly go pitch black, what would you do? Would you stare into the dark reflection of the glass? What if you saw something standing directly behind you? That is exactly why I swore to myself that I would never look at a dead screen in a dark room ever again. My blood runs cold just thinking about it. But to make you understand the sheer panic that paralyzed me, let me take you back to a few hours before that moment. Back to when I foolishly believed that a locked front door and a cozy living room could protect us from whatever was waiting in the dark. It was a late Friday night in the middle of November. The kind of night where the rain does not just fall, it hammers against the glass like thousands of tiny, frantic fingers trying to claw their way inside. My cousin and I were having a sleepover at her house. Her parents were out of town for the weekend, leaving us completely alone in this massive, old, two-story house situated at the end of a very quiet, isolated street. We were just two teenage girls, wrapped in thick blankets, sitting on a large, comfortable sofa in the center of the living room.
Oh my God, what
We
is
had been
she
laughing,
doing?
gossiping, and
Don't
watching
look.
horror movies
I'm so
all evening.
scared.
The only source of light was the dim, sickly yellow glow from the television, and a single large candle burning quietly on the glass coffee table in front of us. Outside, the storm was getting worse. I could hear the distant rumble of thunder rolling over the hills, followed by the relentless pattering of heavy rain against the tall living room windows. Inside, however, everything felt incredibly safe. It was warm. It was comfortable. The heavy wooden front door was bolted shut. The deadbolt was locked in place. The chain was secured. We had checked every single window on the ground floor. Nothing could get in, or so we thought. As the clock struck 1 in the morning, the movie ended, and the credits began to roll in complete silence. We were both getting tired. The conversation slowly died down, replaced by the hypnotic sound of the rain and the rhythmic ticking of the antique clock in the hallway. That hallway always gave me a strange feeling. It was a long, narrow corridor that led from the living room directly into the pitch-black kitchen, completely swallowed by deep, heavy shadows. I tried not to look down that hallway. I really tried. But you know that feeling you get when you just know you are being watched. That sudden, involuntary chill that runs right down your spine and makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I felt it. A heavy, suffocating sensation slowly creeping into the room. I remember looking over at my cousin. She was mindlessly scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The house was so old that it was always making noises. A floorboard creaking upstairs, the pipes groaning in the walls, the wind howling through the chimney. But suddenly, those ordinary sounds felt different. They felt intentional. I heard a slow, heavy creak coming from the ceiling directly above us. It sounded exactly like the wooden floorboards under the weight of someone shifting their footing in the empty bedroom upstairs. I stopped breathing for a second. I listened. Nothing. Just the rain.
It's okay, it's
I
just
told
the
myself
pipes.
I was just being
It has to be
paranoid,
the
that
pipes.
the horror movies had messed with my head. I took a deep breath and looked back at the candle on the table. The small flame was perfectly still, and then the absolute silence of the house was broken. The single candle on the glass table suddenly blew out. It did not flicker. It did not slowly fade away. It was violently snuffed out in a split second, as if someone leaning directly over the table had blown the air right out of their lungs. The living room was instantly plunged into a thick, suffocating darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the muted television. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would break right through my chest. There was no open window. There was no draft. The heating vent was completely shut. I sat there, frozen in fear, staring at the thin wisp of gray smoke curling up from the dead wick. My cousin finally looked up from her phone. She let out a small, nervous laugh and asked if I had blown it out to scare her.
They're still here.
My voice trembled as I
heard them right
whispered that I did
outside.
not touch it. We both sat in the dim light, the silence between us growing heavier by the second. The shadows cast by the television seemed to stretch and twist across the walls, taking on unnatural shapes. I kept my eyes locked on the dark hallway. The gap between the door frames seemed to hold a darkness so thick it felt like a physical presence. I wanted to turn on the main lights, but the switch was all the way across the room, right next to that dark corridor. Neither of us wanted to move. Neither of us wanted to break the illusion of safety that our blankets provided. I tried to swallow the lump of terror in my throat.
Did you hear that?
We convinced
It's coming
ourselves
from the
it was
corner.
just a weird
Look.
draft from the old chimney. We had to, because the alternative was accepting the fact that we were not alone in that room. The tension was unbearable, a quiet dread that coated my skin in a cold sweat. But as terrifying as that blown-out candle was, it was nothing compared to what was about to happen next. The real nightmare had not even begun. My cousin decided she needed a glass of water to calm her nerves.
Please
I
don't
begged
do
her
this.
not to go.
Don't hurt me.
I pleaded with her
I'll
to
do
just stay on the
anything, just
couch
let
with
me
me,
go.
to
I'm
ignore the
fine.
blown-out candle.
Everything's
But she just
fine.
laughed nervously at my panic,
It's-
calling me paranoid, and slowly stood up from the safety of our blankets. I watched her walk towards that pitch-black hallway with a sinking feeling in my stomach. She flicked the kitchen light switch on the wall, but absolutely nothing happened. The power to
heard
that
something
specific
downstairs.
side of the house must have tripped, she muttered
Shouldn't
into the
have come down
dark.
here.
I watched her silhouette slowly disappear into the ink-black kitchen, illuminated only by the weak, shaky flashlight on her mobile phone. I was left completely alone in the massive living room. The television was still emitting a very faint, muted glow, casting long, stretched, and unnatural shadows against the peeling wallpaper. The sound of the heavy rain lashing against the glass windows was absolutely deafening, drowning out any other subtle noises the house might be making. I pulled my knees tightly to my chest, my eyes darting frantically around the dark room. Every single corner seemed to hide a threat. Every shadowy shape felt like it was breathing. And then I saw it. Just out of the corner of my eye,
The
a
entity
tall,
appeared
misty, dark
suddenly,
figure shot
moving
across
with
the
a
hallway
speed that
entrance.
defied-
It moved with a speed that was entirely unnatural and physically impossible for a normal human being. It did not walk. It seemed to glide effortlessly over the old creaking floorboards without making a single sound. My breath hitched violently in my throat. I could not speak. I could not even scream. My vocal cords were completely paralyzed by an absolute primal terror. I
We have to be
managed to
quiet.
force a trembling,
Did you
weak
hear
whisper
that?
out of my mouth,
It's getting closer.
asking the empty room,
God, what
"Who
do we
are
do?
you?" There was no answer, just the relentless pounding of the raging storm outside.
No, that doesn't
I
make
desperately
any
tried to
sense.
convince myself
door
that it was
locked.
just a trick
How
of the
did it
light,
get in
a weird shadow cast from a passing car outside the window. But then, the real nightmare began. A voice, barely audible but incredibly clear, spoke directly into my left ear. It was a raspy, breathless, wet whisper, sounding like it came from a throat that had not been used in decades. "Come here," it said. The sound was so incredibly close that I could almost feel the cold, stale air hitting the sensitive skin on my neck. All the warm blood drained instantly from my face. I was completely frozen in fear, trapped in my own body. A cold sweat broke out all over my trembling skin. I desperately wanted to run, to sprint out the front door, but my legs completely refused to move. I slowly, agonizingly, turned my head, utterly terrified of the horrifying face I might see standing right beside my shoulder. But there was absolutely nothing there. The empty space next to the sofa was completely devoid of life. I tried to call out to my cousin, to scream her name, but my voice was completely gone. I was trapped in a suffocating bubble of absolute panic. And then, the muted television screen flickered wildly for a few seconds, buzzed with static, and suddenly died. The entire room was plunged into absolute crushing darkness for a split second, before a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the space outside. The dead television screen was now nothing more than a giant black mirror. I stared deeply into the dark reflection of the glass, my wide eyes desperately trying to adjust to the sudden gloom. I saw the dim reflection of the couch cushions. I saw the reflection of my own terrified face, pale as a ghost and wide-eyed with panic. And then I saw it. The dark, imposing silhouette, standing directly behind the couch, right behind my head. It was tall, way too tall to be a normal person. Its facial features were completely obscured by the deep, heavy shadows of the room, but I could feel its dead, hollow eyes staring a massive hole right through the back of my skull. It was completely motionless, a cold, menacing, and towering presence that radiated a suffocating aura of pure, unadulterated evil. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, beating so incredibly hard that it physically hurt my chest. I could not take a breath. I was trapped in a tiny, claustrophobic space with a deadly predator, and I was the helpless prey. It did not make a single movement. It just stood there in the dark, watching me intensely through the reflection of the glass screen. The silence in the room was absolutely deafening, broken only by the frantic, rapid pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. I knew deep down that if I turned around, I would be face to face with whatever that horrific thing was. I knew that if I made a single, tiny sound, it would know that I was fully aware of its presence. I slowly, carefully, slid my shaking hand towards my phone resting on the cushion, my terrified eyes never leaving the dark reflection on the television screen. The dark figure remained perfectly still, acting as a silent, malicious observer hiding in the deep shadows. And then, the heavy kitchen door down the hall slammed shut with a violent, deafening bang that shook the entire house. My cousin let out a blood-curdling scream from the other room. The sudden, violent noise broke my frozen trance. I scrambled frantically off the couch, my shaking legs finally finding the adrenaline-fueled strength to move. I ran blindly through the pitch-black living room, my bare feet slipping wildly on the cold wooden floorboards. I did not dare to look back over my shoulder. I crashed heavily into the hallway wall, frantically feeling my way towards the heavy wooden front door. My cousin came sprinting out of the dark kitchen, crying hysterically in the dark, fumbling aggressively with the metal deadbolt. We finally tore the door open and ran out into the freezing, pouring rain, leaving the cursed house
To this day.
and whatever sinister entity was inside it, far behind us in the dark. We never went back into that house again.
The house
Her
at the end of
parents
the
sold
street
it a
has
few
stood
months
empty
later,
for
claiming to the buyers that it was simply too old and required too much expensive maintenance. But my cousin and I knew the real, terrifying reason. We knew that the house belonged to something else now. To this day, I still do not know what that towering thing was. I do not know how it managed to get inside a locked house, or what it truly wanted from us. But I do know one thing for absolute certain. It was waiting patiently for us. It was watching us the entire time we were laughing, hiding in the dark corners, slipping silently through the shadows. And the most terrifying part is, I still hear that raspy, breathless whisper every single time I close my eyes to sleep. Come here. It echoes constantly in my mind. A chilling, permanent reminder of the rainy night I came face to face with the absolute unknown. If you ever find yourself sitting entirely alone in a dark room late at night, staring blankly at a dead television screen, do not look too closely at the dark reflection. You might just see someone, or something, staring right back at you from the shadows. If you have ever experienced something unexplainable, something that made your blood run cold and your heart completely stop in your chest, share your terrifying story in the comments below. And do not forget to subscribe to Lost Horror so I have the motivation to keep bringing you these terrifying true stories every single week. Next week's story is even more insane than this one. So hit that notification bell and stay safe out there in the dark.